Lecture 12 is part one of the lecture about the American modern and the Second World War. During the 1920s, the graphic design profession, as well as art director, increased their visibility in the United States. This is really when the field started to evolve. The graphic designers and art directors took on greater responsibility, many times coordinating the design and typography of a given publication. In 1920 was also when the Art Directors Club of New York was established. The AIGA, which some of you might have heard of, was founded in 1914, and this was the first national group that was focused on fine art printing, but gradually shifted its activities into the commercial design fields. Right now, the AIGA is called the Professional Association of Graphic Design. Between 1914 and 1929, the annual dollar volume of advertising rose from 600,000 to nearly 3 billion. The United States saw the continued dominance of conventional design and typography. So if you remember, a lot of the designers that came from the Bauhaus left Germany because of Hitler and World War II and ended up coming to America. So this is when European and European-inspired designs began to appear on the American scene. Exhibits from the Exposition Internationale were featured at New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art, signaling a mainstream interest in the Art Deco style. And really, from 1926 on, there was a further expansion of interest in Art Deco among urban consumers. There were two separate streams that made up modern European design during this era, and these are something that are important to note. This could show up on a future exam. The first is that designers such as Edward McKnight Kauffer and A.M. Cassandre, who used formal devices derived from modern art, including Cubism, Futurism, and Purism, they used those to make striking graphics. And this first stream came together in the Art Deco style, which was referred to as commercial modern. So that was the one stream. The second stream was the European design, which consisted of Dada, as well as De Style, Russian constructivism, Bauhaus, and the new typography. And this was different than the Art Deco style because they still had a very deep commitment to political change. The constructivist stream emphasized graphic design and typography over fine art, so it really speaks to the graphic design profession. During the 1930s, the mass majority of modern design works from American Europe did display the Art Deco or commercial modern style. And two of these magazines that came about in the 1930s were Fortune magazine and Vanity Fair. Magazines really evolved quickly because, oftentimes they came out monthly or bi-monthly. And magazines were publications that hired a lot of both American designers as well as European designers. So the first magazine we'll talk about is Fortune, and the first issue of Fortune magazine appeared in 1930. And it was aimed at the affluent urban businessman, and I believe that Fortune magazine is still around today. It contained critical analysis and feature articles on major American industries, and the first art director was, his name was T.M. Cleland, and he chose a conservative design for the magazine, which you can see here. So you have this bold, three-dimensional serifed lettering. The layouts were organized with a grid. Text and images were really set apart as discrete units. There's a lot of black borders. It had a very elegant, understated style. And if you compare this to a lot of the newspapers or things that were printed with letterpress, and this was still letterpress, but if you remember, they would just use every single typeface and imagery to make sure that they utilize that space to its fullest, you can see here that it's really quite open and airy. The most daring element in the magazine's early stages was the employment of a photographer by the name of Margaret Burke White. She worked on a series of photographs of Swift and Company's Chicago hog processing plant, which was illustrated in the first issue of Fortune. So it's really hard to see here in this image, and you can look at your textbook as well. But her work showed a mountain containing 1,500 tons of what they called pig dust. And I know it's really kind of hard to see in these pictures. But while her photos were often composed with sophisticated constructivist elements, in their layouts in the magazine were conventional. So you can still see the angles, the shadows. She actually got her start photographing industrial landscapes in Cleveland. And it was said that she actually abandoned her photography equipment after the shoot to be burned when she was finished just because it was so gross. So this is another ad. So the first 52 pages of Fortune's magazine were made up of advertisements. So even today, a lot of magazines make their money and can kind of pay for themselves through advertising. So you can see this ad for Wurlitzer. It's a very typical ad from this period. And then, I would ask if we were in class, what is the most striking part of this ad? So kind of take a look and think about what is striking about this ad. But you can also see that there's a number of inelegant typefaces which really compete for the reader's attention. You've got the logo, and then if this was bigger, you could see this is text weight, small caps here, italics here. But the thing that is striking is this E here, this drop cap E, which really clashes with the rest of the ad. In ads like the one for Wurlitzer, it's clear that the copywriter was the most prominent part of any advertising team. If you watched Mad Men when it was on Netflix, it's a really cool show about the advertising world in the 50s and 60s. The art directors kind of were behind the scenes, and it was the copywriters and the creative directors that would meet with the clients and stuff. So there was often a tendency toward commercial messages that promise intangibles. So this idea that the family is going to come together and sit around the piano and sort of like Leave It to Beaver, if you're old enough to remember that show. But the majority of the illustrations had no modern tendencies, and they really, American corporations had this fundamentally conservative outlook and sought out art directors who would avoid offending middle-class taste. So, and this is sort of in contrast to European ads. So the Hotel Lexington ad on the left, and then you've got the Europe ad on the right. So the ad on the right was an American company, but it maintained a European flavor by acquiring a number of British shipping interests. And you can see that with this ship, it's very Art Nouveau photograph. They're using sans serif typography. They're not centering their type. They're kind of, everything is a little bit asymmetrical. And then you can see this ad, which is very centered, a very, very specific photograph. And you've got this italic type. So they are very different. This ad for the air conditioner company Carrier stood out for its striking modernist photographic composition. So you've got this beautiful, very abstract, very constructivist photograph of buildings where the photographer's kind of shooting up into the sky. The Roman type, however, though, makes a number of shifts between italic and bold, some attempts to indicate emphasis, but there's a lot of copy here if you think about advertising of today. It's really mostly just like headline image and very little text. This Carrier ad displayed a similar concept, combining conventional design with modern photography. So this is almost a collage of buildings put together that could have been taken from the Berlin Dada. The image combines skyscrapers, monumental neon signs in the U.S. Capitol, but the layout is still conventional, separating the image from the text using those framing devices. So this is 7 years later. The 1937 Fortune featured one of the most famous Art Deco designs of all time, when the cover bore an illustration by Austrian artist Joseph Binder. His cover used the basic shape of a Christmas tree, but as a tower of skyscrapers, which of course is sort of the symbol of corporate America and corporate power. And he made the strong symmetry of the triangular frame compete with a high contrast use of black and white blocks to form the sides of the skyscrapers, which really has a lot of similarities with the illustration that had been done at the Bauhaus, which we studied a few lectures back. So you can see this idea of the crystalline forms, the very severe angles, the stars, and really this is showing how Art Deco artists successfully assimilated expressionist devices into their work. Fortune magazine did remain reserved in its design until 1945, when a German designer took over as art director and introduced a new modern style. So Vanity Fair was another periodical of this era to focus on modern art, which often published reproductions of Cubist, Futurist, and Expressionist works. It's also still a magazine that is in publication today. In 1929, Condé Nast, who's the publisher of the magazine, hired the art director of the German edition of Vogue magazine, Mehmed Aga, to take over the design of the publications. And he worked quickly to install a new style that used elements drawn from both the Art Deco and constructivist streams of European modernism. So you can see here with the Vanity Fair, the cover was drawn by Georges Lepape, who was a famed Art Deco illustrator. So this is an illustration. You can also see the stylized simplification of forms. So there's very strong geometric elements here, sort of like Cassandre, aspects of cubism. You've got the sans serif typeface all set in lowercase. So really beautiful magazine cover. And then the more dramatic initial change that he made was with the magazine's typography. So he redesigned the contents page using Futura, as well as bold rules and negative space, which is really atypical of constructivist, typical of constructivist aesthetics. Very wide spacing, the use of uppercase and lowercase, the use of tracking. You can see the idea of grid here. And really, he was able to show the clarity of constructivism with the grace of the Art Deco style. He was also the first art director to use double-paged photo spreads and color cover photography. He was the first designer to make use of the full bleed, so taking it outside the trim, and allowed photographs to expand to all four margins and completely cover the page. In 1931, Condé Nast acknowledged Aga's importance to the magazine when they included the art director's name on the masthead of the contents page of Vanity Fair for the very first time. So I know this image is super, super fuzzy. You can take a look at it in your textbook. But Margaret Burke White also became a photographer for Vanity Fair. And you can see how her photograph completely took over the right page. There's no rule or frame to separate the image from the page itself. And the heading is also located asymmetrically 2/3 down the page. You can see it right here. The heading connects with the image as it lines with one of the horizontal bars in the image. So when we talk about lining things up, you can see how it's lined up here. But it was really quite groundbreaking that the art director led the photographer and designers to work this way. Sibe Pinellas was another very famous graphic design art director who and groomed a number of young proteges that were groomed by Aga at Condé Nast. She was Austrian and emigrated to New York in 1923. She was hired by Aga to work at both Vanity Fair and Vogue magazines. And her work was just beautiful. So this is an example which features a full color image of two women's faces. You can see this dramatic cropping, and it's not even centered. So it's off-centered to the right. She's put it at an angle. And so you kind of have this movement of your eye where the corner of that photograph goes up to the masthead of the magazine. Another really cool thing was that the magazine's name, Vogue, was handwritten in script. And the art director, Aga, really allowed artists such as Sibe Pinellas the freedom to design covers from scratch. She moved on in 1942 to become the art director of Glamour magazine, where she introduced many of the modern design techniques that she learned by working under Aga. She was the first woman art director of a mass market periodical, and her success at Glamour led her to positions as art director at 17 magazine, Charm, and Mademoiselle magazine. So this is one of her covers from 17 magazine. And she really established her independent reputation as a talented modern designer. She used a standardized lettering style, which is lowercase Bodoni, and you can see she's using it in its bold, condensed, italic form. The photographs have been montaged, so at first glance, the viewer perceives it's a reflection. But however, it is not a reflection. It's two different models. Alexei Brodovich was another European immigrant who became influential as an art director in America during the 1930s in the publication design world. He worked on a parallel track to that of Aga and introduced a lot of modern design elements over a period of years. He started working in Paris in the 1920s and had become very familiar with the work of Art Deco illustrators such as A.M. Cassandre, who he actually hired to do a series of covers for his magazine, Harper's Bazaar. So this is the magazine covered by Cassandre. You can see the rich red colors, the sinuous shape of the lips, the very, highly illustrative eyelashes, and really the shape of the iris and the pupil are perfectly round. And you can see a lot of purism in this magazine cover, but you can also see another art style. And I'll give you a couple seconds to kind of think about it and, what art style goes through your head. Hopefully you thought of both cubism. There's a little bit of surrealism in here. You might think about like Salvador Dali, the way they kind of disembodied pieces of human anatomy. So this was really groundbreaking at this time. Alexei Brodovich also oversaw the design of some of the most compelling double-page spreads of photography and text ever seen. So he's really starting to use this idea of integration between text and photography. He employed a lot of very famous photographers, and really the photography served as the basis for the overall design of the spread. So you can see that here in this spread that he did for Harper's Bazaar. The photo was bled across the gutter, which you can't really see, but it was kind of, if you think about the gutter being right in the middle. And on the other side, he formed a column of type into another smooth curve that echoed the contour of the photograph. And this had never really been done before. He used bold lettering at the start of each line of text to emphasize the sweeping line that structures the entire spread, so you can see here. And he used the serif typeface called Bodoni for most of the text in Harper's Bazaar, showing that sans serif type was not essential to the creation of harmonious modern design. And this is another spread where you can really see he's emphasizing the shape of this sort of letter form of Z that he's creating here with the text, and that's also kind of emulated in this photograph. PM Magazine was a smaller trade publication that served design professionals, and it really had another important role in educating a generation of young American art directors. So PM Magazine stood for Production Manager, and it first appeared in 1934. The early issues focused mainly on practical issues related to the printing and typesetting businesses. But as the interest in European design grew, the monthly magazine focused more and more on bringing European styles to the attention of American art directors. So in 1936, the magazine began publishing overviews of individual European artists, and you should recognize Lucien Bernard with his sock plakat style. Lucien Bernard actually served as the guest art director for the March issue, so he was able to design the layout of articles celebrating himself. The double-page spread juxtaposes the Priester poster with an overview of Bernhard's work, which you can see here, tying in those colors. Bernhard adopted many of the principles of constructivism in his new job, using asymmetry as well as a red geometric block in his composition. The November 1937 issue devoted similar attention to Lester Beale, suggesting that the influx of European designers was having an impact on American graphic designers. You can see this dramatic use of negative space, this idea of the red lines, the using things on an angle. And really what this cover is doing is mocking the decorative excesses of conventional typography. So you can see he's got this really ornamental P, but it's almost being overwhelmed by this slab serif M. And these two red rules seem to kind of pull the asymmetrical M into the future, away from this ornamental past. The editors of PM Magazine were also committed to Bauhaus ideals with the integration of design, arts, and architecture, and so many articles in the magazine covered this subject. This is another cover by Lester Beale, and you can see it's about the Bauhaus tradition and the new typography. And really, the focus on graphic design was indicated in a title change when PM Magazine became AD, which is short for art directors. So it really became a magazine for graphic designers and art directors. So amid all the affluence and glamour shown in these magazines that you just looked at with the Vanity Fair, at this time, the country was actually in the grip of the Great Depression. So the stock market crash did not alone cause the Great Depression, but it set off a chain of financial calamities that resonated throughout the U.S. and even affected Europe. By 1933, the unemployment in the U.S. surpassed 30%, which is just like unheard of. And because of the effects of the Great Depression, some graphic designers were forced to turn to the government for work as the commercial segment of the market grew smaller. The new administration elected in 1932 under President Roosevelt sought to alleviate the crisis by largely increasing the federal workforce. He established the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA, which involved the construction of public projects including roads, dams, governmental buildings. And one of these branches of the WPA, called the FAP, was the Federal Arts Project, which was to provide government work for artists in a variety of fields. So he did not forget the arts. And during an 8-year period, the FAP commissioned over 35,000 unique designs, resulting in 2 million published posters. So the FAP viewed the poster as a democratic art form which could reach people from all walks of life. And it was really, it was an open environment in which Art Deco styles became widespread. So under the FAP, American artists were free to pursue the modernist styles that corporate advertisers had largely shunned. So if you remember all those very tight ads with the boxy photographs and heavy copy, now because of the FAP, designers and artists are able to kind of be more expressive with their work. So this is a poster by Richard Floth, who created a poster for an oil and watercolor exhibition. About a third of the posters were actually produced in New York City. And this Richard Floth, who created this poster, was actually a student at the Bauhaus in the 1920s. He favored Art Deco over the more austere constructivist styles, which you can kind of see here with this image. And really, like the majority of the graphic works produced by the FAP, they had a very restricted color palette because of the way these were printed. And this was screen printed or silk screen printed. And the silk screen process was the first introduced to New York, who really adapted it to all the different commercial printing techniques. So it was most often used for graphic pieces that were used for a short period of time. So it was much less expensive than lithography or chromolithography. So if they were just going to do a small run, they would often lean on silkscreen or screen printing. And it did allow still a range of color that was a little bit different than lithography. And after the FAP artists shifted to silk screening, their output increased tremendously. So the New York shop alone printed over 500 posters in a single day. So this is another poster designed by Martin Weitzman. These posters function to awaken the broader American public to the beauty of Art Deco abstraction the way that no other magazine could, because these were just hung around. They were on, on walls and fences and on hoardings. And this poster uses a style based on A.M. Cassandre's Purist work, which reduces the bow of the ship to a flat plane that runs off the frame on three sides. Also a little bit reminiscent of the beggar staffs, of the sac-placat style. And then you can see these letter forms are very vertically proportioned, which kind of complement the towering height of the ship's prow. This is a poster created for the Brookside Zoo, and this was really one of the most visually strong posters to come out of the FAP, which was designed by an artist named Karkin. He just went by one word name. You can see a lot of the sac-placat influence here. The powerful panther has been joined with simple decorative text. It's crouching in this space that was created by the word Brookside and Zoo, and really helps to tie text and image together with the overlapping, the way the tail curves over the word. And then one note, final note after, that kind of happened with all these posters is that when the U.S. entered World War II in 1942, the FAP poster division was transferred to the Defense Department graphics section, through which graphic designers continued to serve the government by making a lot of war posters. Lester Beale was an American designer who was born in Missouri, and he moved to New York City, where he opened a freelance graphic design business. He was really one of the most important homegrown American designers to adopt the sophisticated European styles. His early works are a lot of posters that he designed for the Rural Electrification Administration. So this was a poster advertising the new technology of radio, and you can see this beautifully simple abstract scheme to convey the message. The three white arrows are positioned to create the idea of space. So these radio waves are coming into the home. Still completely flat planes of color, also kind of bringing back the style of the ukiyo-e, of the beggar staffs. But what really distinguishes Beale's work from that of his contemporaries is in the manner in which he eliminates the decorative excesses of Art Deco in favor of a simplified constructivist style. So this is another poster he created for the Department of Agriculture, and what he's showing here is his ability to effectively integrate black and white photography with an abstract geometric background. So you've got these red stripes in the blue field, emulating the American flag, but then you've got this beautiful image of a young girl and a boy on a fence. So you've still got these linear lines that he then transfers to the idea of the flag. And this is really an upbeat message that he's conveying, using the patriotic use of color, and the stenciled letters on the bottom are meant to represent the look of everyday official writing that would be on crates. So while we had very sophisticated business magazines, we also at this time came about pulp magazines. So these were created in striking contrast to the elite styles of both Art Deco and Constructivism, and there were thousands and thousands of these that were in publication. And what they were a response to the misery of the Great Depression, and really flourished in the U.S. during this period, which helped to offer people an escape through mystery, adventure, and sexuality. And they were called pulp magazines because the paper used to print them was super cheap, very low quality, but still really formed a thriving popular culture industry that provided work for thousands of artists. So this is a cover of a magazine by H.J. Ward, and it's called Spicy Mystery Stories. And it was really designed to catch the attention of a passerby from the shelves of a newsstand. So if you think about newsstands back then, even today, covered in covers of magazines. So how do you catch somebody's eye? So you use these brilliant colors and bold design elements. These were often said to be a bit taboo because of just, at this time, if you think about, the way people dressed, they were very conservatively dressed. In fact, in 1942, the mayor of New York walked by a newsstand and a copy of Spicy Mystery Stories caught his eye, which led to an assault on the Spicy Empire, which was actually soon forced to close because it was so scandalous. And this ends part 1 of our lecture. The next one will be part 2.